The war record hung on the wall of the great hall in letters of cold blue light. 900 cycles, 0 defeats. Every officer who walked past it slowed for a moment, the way the faithful slow before a shrine. Fleet Commander Doran stood beneath it with his claws folded behind his back. He had seen the record grow in his own lifetime. He had added 41 of those victories himself. To him, the numbers were not pride. They were simply truth, as fixed as the orbit of a star. His officers waited in rows below the display. They were young, sharp, eager for a fight. The Voreth were a species built for war, with armored hides and quick minds and a culture that taught a child to read battle maps before it could speak. They did not lose. The galaxy had learned this the hard way, one broken fleet at a time. "Report," Doran said. A scout officer stepped forward. "A single vessel, Commander, drifting at the edge of the Kelmaris Nebula. It is damaged. One drive core is dark. It has not moved from its path in 6 hours." Doran studied the readout that flickered above the officer's hand. The ship was ugly by Voreth standards, all hard angles and exposed plating, with no grace in its shape. It looked thrown together rather than designed. A small thing, barely a tenth the size of his flagship. "Whose is it?" he asked. "Unknown, Commander. The markings match no species in our records. We believe they call themselves humans. Their territory sits far from the main lanes. Small, quiet. We have never had reason to deal with them." A ripple of amusement passed through the officers. A nobody from nowhere, wandering wounded into Vorath space. The conclusion wrote itself. Doran did not smile. He had survived 4 decades of war by never trusting a thing he did not understand. Tactical history. "None on file, Commander. They have fought small border skirmishes with 2 neighbors. Nothing of note. They have never faced a power of our size." "And the damage to the ship?" "Genuine, our scans suggest. The hull shows scoring from a recent fight. They are limping home, we think, and chose the wrong path through the nebula." Doran was quiet for a long moment. Around him the great hall hummed with the low sound of the flagship's engines, a sound he had lived inside so long he no longer heard it. Above him the war record glowed, patient and certain. "Bring the fleet to intercept," he said at last. 3 cruisers forward, the rest in standard wedge. Open a channel and order them to surrender and submit to inspection." The officers moved at once. Within minutes the Voreth fleet shifted course, a wall of dark warships sliding through the colored mist of the nebula toward the lone human vessel. It was a formation that had ended civilizations. Doran had used it 100 times. The pattern was beautiful in its simplicity, and it had never once failed him. The intercept took an hour. In that hour the human ship did nothing. It did not change course. It did not raise its weapons. It did not answer a single hail. The communications officer sent the surrender order 4 times in 3 languages, and 4 times the silence came back. "They may not understand us," the officer offered. "They understand," Doran said. He was watching the small ship grow on the display, its scarred hull catching the light. "Silence is an answer. Send it again." The 5th message went out. For the first time the human ship responded, not with words but with motion. Its dark drive core flared back to life. The vessel that had drifted helpless for 6 hours suddenly steadied, turned its blunt nose toward the oncoming fleet, and held position. It did not run, it did not beg, it simply faced them. The officers fell quiet. In their experience, every species did one of 2 things when the Voreth wedge appeared on their sensors. They fled, or they surrendered. A single damaged ship facing an entire fleet had only those 2 roads, and pride was not one of them. There was no third choice that ended in anything but death. The human ship had chosen the third choice anyway. Doran leaned forward. Something cold moved through him, faint and unfamiliar, a feeling he had not had in many cycles. It was not fear. He did not know its name. He only knew that the small, ugly ship was not behaving the way his 900 victories said it should. "Commander," the scout officer said, "your orders." On the display, the human vessel sat motionless against the glowing nebula, weapons still cold, channels still silent, daring the fleet to come. It looked less like a wounded animal now, and more like a stone in the road that the river would have to break itself against. Doran's intelligence officer spoke softly from her station, almost to herself. "Commander, there is a note in the trade records, from one of the human neighbors we have dealt with. A single line. It is strange." "Read it." She paused. "It says when you meet them, do not corner them. Let them leave if they want to leave." The hall was silent. Doran read the line again on his own screen, the cold feeling growing. "They are one ship," the scout officer said, and there was a thin edge of doubt in his voice now. "One damaged ship, Commander, against 30 of ours." "Yes," Doran said. He kept his eyes on the unmoving vessel, "and they know that as well as we do." He gave the order to advance. The wedge tightened and rolled forward, 30 warships closing on one. Above them all, the war record glowed its perfect blue, counting down the final minutes before the number changed forever. The first shot did not come from the Voreth. For 900 cycles, the Dominion had always fired first. It was part of the ritual of conquest. The wedge would advance, the surrender order would go unanswered, and then the lead cruiser would loose a single warning volley to break the enemy's nerve. Most fleets scattered before the second shot ever flew. So when the lance of light tore across the nebula, every officer on Doran's bridge expected it to come from their own forward cruiser. It did not. It came from the small human ship, and it struck the cruiser Vendrel square in its left flank, where the armor plating met the engine housing. The Vendrel broke open like a dropped egg. Atmosphere and bodies spilled into the colored mist. The cruiser spun, its drive core flaring wild, and drifted out of formation trailing fire. The bridge went utterly silent. Doran stared at the display. A Voreth cruiser had not been lost in open battle in his entire career. The Vendrel was not the strongest ship in the fleet, but it was armored against everything the known galaxy could throw at it. And the human shot had not even struck the front, where the shields were heaviest. It had struck the seam between plates, a weak point the Voreth knew existed, but believed no enemy could ever target in the chaos of a closing charge. "How?" Doran said. It was not a question. He simply needed to hear someone explain it. His tactical officer worked frantically at her station. "They waited, Commander. They held fire until our wedge rotated for the final approach. For 2 seconds, every cruiser in the formation turns its flank toward the center as it locks into attack position. 2 seconds. They fired into that window." Doran felt the cold thing in his chest sharpen into something he could name now. The Voreth had used the wedge for centuries. The 2-second rotation was a known flaw dismissed long ago because no enemy had ever reacted fast enough to exploit it. The humans had not only seen it, they had been counting on it from the moment the fleet appeared. Far across the nebula, aboard the warship Resolute, the mood was very different from fear. Captain Reyes sat in her chair with her boots up on the console, watching the Voreth wedge stumble as the wounded cruiser fell out of line. She was a lean woman with gray streaking her dark hair, and a calm in her that her crew had learned to trust more than any shield. "One down," said her gunner, a young man with steady hands. "They're rattled. Look at the formation. They don't know what to do." "They've never had to know," Reyes said. "Nobody's ever shot back and meant it." She lowered her boots and leaned toward the display. "Hold us steady. Let them come. The longer they think this is still a hunt, the better." The Resolute was hurt. That much was true. The dark drive core was real damage from a real fight 3 days ago. But Reyes had spent those 3 days deciding she would not die quietly in a nebula, and she had spent them turning her wounded ship into a problem the size of a fleet. The Voreth came on. They closed ranks around the gap where the Vendrel had been, the wedge reforming with grim discipline. Doran's voice carried across his bridge, hard and certain. They have one weapon and one good angle. They have spent it. Press in. Surround them. I want that ship intact for study. The fleet surged forward, and the Resolute moved. It did not flee. It dove straight into the heart of the wedge, into the place no sane captain would go, where 30 ships could fire on one. But inside the wedge, the Voreth could not fire freely. Their own ships were in the way. Every gun that tracked the human vessel found a friendly hull behind it. The formation that crushed enemies from the outside became a cage that trapped its own teeth on the inside. The Resolute spun through them, fast and ugly and impossible to predict, losing shots into seams and sensor arrays and drive housings. A second cruiser lost its engines. A third took a hit that blinded its targeting systems. The wedge, designed for one perfect charge, had no answer for an enemy that lived in its center and refused to behave. "Break formation," Doran ordered, and even as he said it, he knew it was the wrong order, the order the humans wanted. A wedge that breaks is just 30 ships in confusion, but to hold the wedge was to keep the cage closed around their own throats. The fleet broke. The nebula filled with scattered warships hunting a single fast shadow that knew exactly where each of them was, and exactly where each of them could not shoot. It was then that the human captain finally answered the hail. The channel opened on Doran's bridge, and a steady voice filled the hall in clear, plain Vorath. The translation was perfect. She had learned their language. She had prepared for them. "This is Captain Reyes of the human warship Resolute," she said. "You hailed me 5 times. Now I'll answer once. Turn your fleet around and go home. We did not come here for a war, but if you stay, you will not all leave." Doran stood beneath his glowing war record, listening to a single damaged ship calmly offer mercy to a fleet of 30. Every instinct of his species screamed that this was madness, that one ship could not threaten a Dominion fleet, that the numbers alone made the outcome certain. But 2 of his cruisers were already dead, and a third was blind, and the human voice had not held a single drop of fear. "Commander," his tactical officer whispered, "what do we do?" Doran did not answer. He was looking at the war record, and for the first time in his life, he was wondering if the number on it might change. Pride is a kind of armor, and like all armor it can be turned against the one who wears it. Doran had worn his pride for 40 cycles, and the offer of mercy from a single damaged ship cut through it cleaner than any weapon. A human captain, outnumbered 30 to 1, had told him to go home. The shame of it burned hotter than the loss of 2 cruisers. "Close the channel," he said. The plain, steady voice cut off. Doran turned to his officers, and the cold thing in his chest had hardened into something he could use. "Recall every ship, full fleet. We end this now. I want that vessel in pieces." His commanders obeyed, and the scattered warships began to gather. But as they moved, Doran watched them and saw the truth of his fleet for the first time. His ships were beautiful and disciplined. They moved in perfect lines. Each captain waited for the order before acting, because that was how the Voreth fought. Command flowed from the top down, clean and unbroken, and no officer would dream of acting without it. It was a system that had never failed because it had never been tested by something fast enough to punish hesitation. The Resolute was that something. Aboard the human ship, there were no perfect lines and no waiting. Reyes called a target, and her gunner was already firing before she finished the word. Her navigator threw the ship into a turn on her own judgment, trusting that the captain would understand why. The engineer rerouted power to a failing shield without being asked, because she could see it failing and did not need permission to act. The crew of the Resolute fought as a single animal, every part moving on instinct, every mind trusting the others. The Voreth fought as a machine, the humans fought as a pack. The 2 ways of war met in the heart of the nebula, and the difference showed in seconds. A Voreth cruiser locked its guns on the Resolute, and waited the half-second for its captain to confirm the shot. In that half-second, the human ship was no longer there. It had moved the moment its own navigator saw the gun begin to track, and the Voreth shot tore through empty mist, while the Resolute put 2 rounds into the cruiser's exposed drive. "They are not faster than us," Doran's tactical officer said, watching it happen again and again. "Their ship is slower than ours, but they decide faster. By the time we choose, they have already moved." Doran understood, and the understanding was bitter. His entire fleet was built to follow him. Every advantage of numbers and armor meant nothing against an enemy whose every crew member was allowed to think for themselves. He could not give orders fast enough. No commander could. He tried anyway. He called targets, called maneuvers, called for ships to box the human vessel in. And each time, the Resolute slipped the noose before it closed, because it only had to outthink the speed of his voice. But the human ship was paying for the fight. Reyes felt it in the deck under her feet, in the way the Resolute groaned with each hard turn. A shield generator had burned out. A whole bank of guns on the port side had gone dark. The ship that had walked into the nebula already wounded was now bleeding from a dozen new cuts. "We can't keep this pace, Captain," her engineer called. "The frame won't take it. Another 10 minutes and the spine cracks." "Then we don't need 11, Reyes said. She did not look away from the fight. "Hold her together. We are almost where I want them." A Voreth cruiser caught the Resolute with a glancing shot, and the human ship spun hard, alarms screaming through its corridors. On Doran's bridge, a cheer went up. The first solid hit. They had drawn blood at last. "Again," Doran said. "Press the wound. They are hurt." His fleet pressed in, smelling the kill. And here Doran saw the second thing that no Voreth record had prepared him for. The Resolute was hurt, badly hurt, far past the point where any species he had ever fought would have surrendered or fled. Every other enemy had a line, a moment where the damage outweighed the cause, where survival became more important than the fight. The Voreth counted on that line. They called it the breaking point, and every species had won. The humans did not break. The Resolute, trailing fire, half its guns dead, its frame screaming, turned back into the fleet and kept fighting. Reyes did not slow. She did not look for an exit. She fought as if losing was simply not a thing that could happen, as if the only way out was through the wreck of every ship that stood against her. Doran's intelligence officer spoke quietly, and her voice was uneasy. "Commander, I have been watching their damage. By our measure, that ship should have yielded 6 minutes ago. Its losses are past survivable. They are still attacking." "Then they are fools," Doran said. "No, Commander." She turned to him, and the unease was plain on her face now. "Fools panic. These ones are calm. They are not fighting past their breaking point. I do not think they have one." Doran looked at the display, at the wounded human ship that would not die and would not run, and felt the certainty of 900 cycles crack quietly down its center. He had built his whole life on the knowledge that every enemy could be broken. He had finally met one that did not know how. And somewhere in the deeper dark of the nebula, far from the fight, a sensor on his flagship caught a flicker of movement, there and gone. No one was watching that screen. Every eye on the bridge was fixed on the dying ship that refused to die. Every species that the Voreth had ever conquered kept records, and the Voreth kept all of them. Locked deep in the flagship's memory were the histories of 100 broken civilizations, their secrets harvested before their worlds went dark. While the battle raged outside, Doran's intelligence officer did something no one on the bridge had time to notice. She stopped watching the fight and started searching those records for a single word: humans. She found almost nothing. A few trade notes, 2 border skirmishes, a handful of warnings, all short, all strange, all saying the same thing in different ways. Do not corner them. Let them leave. And then, buried in the archive of a species the Voreth had crushed 300 cycles ago, she found something longer. A study. A xenobiology report written by careful minds who had observed humanity from a safe distance and tried to understand what they were looking at. She read it fast, and the more she read, the colder she became. The report explained where humans came from. Their homeworld was not a gentle place. It was a world of ice ages and floods, of plagues that killed by the millions, of predators that hunted the early humans for food. The planet itself seemed to be trying to kill them at every turn. Most species evolved in safety and grew soft. Humans had evolved inside a slow disaster, and every generation that survived passed down one lesson to the next. Endure. Whatever comes, endure it or die. The report had a line the officer read 3 times. The author had written it almost in fear. Humans do not fight to win. They fight to not lose. These are not the same thing. A species that fights to win will stop when winning becomes impossible. A species that fights to not lose will keep going long after victory is gone, because to them, stopping is the only true defeat. She finally understood the warning. Do not corner them. A human with a way out might take it. A human with no way out had nothing left but the fight and would pour everything into it, because their whole history had taught them that surrender meant the end of everything. The Vorath had been trying all battle to corner the resolute. They had been doing the one thing every record begged them not to do. She turned from her station. "Commander, I need you to hear this." Doran did not turn. He was watching the resolute slip another trap. Not now. "Commander, the humans cannot be broken because they do not have a breaking point. Their world built them without one. They will not stop. They cannot stop. We have to let them leave now before this gets worse." "It cannot get worse," Doran said. "They are one ship, we have lost 2, the numbers are still ours." But even as he said it, he was no longer sure the numbers meant what he had always believed. Across the nebula, Reyes felt the moment turning. The Resolute was dying under her, and she knew it, and she had always known it would. The damaged ship limping through the nebula had never been trying to survive the fight on its own. It had been bait. 3 days ago, after the battle that wounded her ship, Reyes had made a choice. She could run for home and hope no one followed, or she could turn the Resolute into a lure and finish the threat before it ever reached human space. She had chosen the lure. She had let her ship drift wounded and silent at the edge of the nebula, a wounded animal too tempting to ignore, and she had waited for a predator overconfident enough to take the bait. The Vorath had taken it perfectly. They had charged in with their whole fleet. They had broken their formation. They had scattered themselves through the deepest part of the nebula, the part where the colored mist was thickest and sensors could see barely anything at all. They had let themselves be drawn exactly where she wanted them, into the blind dark, far from open space. "Captain," her navigator said, "we are at the mark. They're all inside the cloud. All of them. Every ship, the whole fleet is in the deep mist with us. They followed us in." Reyes allowed herself one breath. The ship around her was a wreck held together by will and good engineers, but it had done its job. It had brought the whole undefeated fleet into a place where the thing the Vorath dismissed as useless cover was about to become the most important fact in the battle. "Signal the others," she said. "Tell them it's time." On Doran's bridge, the forgotten sensor flickered again, and this time it was not one contact. It was many. They rose out of the deep nebula on every side, ships that had been hiding in the thick mist the whole time, their engines cold, their signals dark, waiting. A human squadron, not large. But it did not need to be large. It needed only to be in the right place, and Reyes had spent the entire battle putting the Vorath fleet exactly where the trap could close. The intelligence officer saw the new contacts bloom across her screen and felt the last of her certainty die. "Commander," she said quietly, "the wounded ship was never alone. We did not catch them. They caught us." Doran stared at the rising lights surrounding his scattered fleet and finally understood the shape of the thing he had walked into. The silence, the drifting, the single ship that would not run. None of it had been weakness. All of it had been a hand reaching out to pull him into the dark. Above him, the war record still glowed its perfect blue. He looked at it once, and then he did not look at it again. The trap did not close with a great blow. It closed the way a fist closes, slowly, finger by finger, until there is no longer any space to escape. The hidden human ships rose from the deep mist and did not charge. They took position. Each one slid into a gap in the scattered Voreth fleet, cutting between cruisers, blocking lanes of retreat, settling into the thick nebula where the Voreth sensors could barely find them. By the time Doran's officers understood what was happening, the human squadron had already woven itself through the entire fleet like a net drawn tight. "Reform," Doran ordered. "All ships to me, tight wedge now." But there was no forming a wedge in the deep mist. The Voreth fleet had been built to fight in open space, where its ships could see for vast distances and strike from far away. In the thick heart of the nebula, sensors reached only a fraction of their range. The colored cloud swallowed signals and hid movement. The Voreth had always treated such places as worthless, useless ground no commander would choose. They had never trained to fight in them, because they had never needed to. The humans had chosen this ground on purpose. They had spent the whole battle herding the Voreth into it. Now the fight became the kind the Voreth could not win. It was close and blind and fast, ships looming out of the mist at knife range and vanishing again before the Voreth guns could lock. The Dominion's great advantage, its long reach and heavy formations, meant nothing when an enemy could appear from any direction at any moment. Worse, in the murk, the Voreth could no longer tell friend from foe at a glance. Twice, Doran's own cruisers fired on each other in the confusion. The humans never made that mistake. They knew exactly how many ships were theirs, and everything else in the mist was a target. Doran fought to hold his fleet together, and his officers fought to obey, but the command structure that had won 900 cycles was now the chain that dragged them down. Each Voreth captain still waited for orders, and orders could not move fast enough through the chaos. By the time Doran saw a threat and named a response, the threat had already struck and gone. His fleet was a body trying to fight with a brain too slow for its limbs. The human ships had no such delay. Each one acted on its own, trusting the others, the whole squadron moving like the crew of the Resolute writ large, a single hunting mind spread across a dozen hulls. They did not need to be told. They saw and they acted, and the gap between seeing and acting was the gap that killed. Ships began to die. Not human ships, Voreth ships, the great undefeated cruisers, falling one after another in the blind mist. A cruiser that had never taken a scratch in 40 cycles broke apart when two human vessels struck it from opposite sides at once. Another lost its bridge to a shot it never saw coming. The perfect war record was being unwritten in real time, and Doran could do nothing but watch the lights of his fleet wink out across his display. In the center of it all, the Resolute fought on, wounded and burning and unstoppable. Reyes had brought her ruined ship through the whole battle on nothing but will, and now, with the trap sprung and her squadron loose, she turned the Resolute toward the one ship she had been hunting from the start. The flagship. Doran's flagship, the great vessel that carried the glowing war record, now cut off from its escorts and alone in the mist. "Bring us alongside the big one," Reyes said. Her voice was rough now, tired but steady as ever. "The rest can run. I want the one giving the orders." The Resolute closed on the flagship like a wolf on a wounded bull. The human squadron peeled the escorts away, cutting them off, leaving the flagship isolated in a clearing of empty mist. Doran's ship was vast and heavily armed, far stronger than the broken Resolute. But strength meant nothing now. The flagship was alone, surrounded, with no formation to protect it and no fleet left to command, because the fleet was scattered and dying in the dark. Doran stood on his bridge and watched the human ship come. Around him, his officers worked in something close to panic, calling for help that could not come, trying to raise ships that no longer answered. The great hall that had hummed with confidence at the start of the day now rang with alarms. The channel opened on its own. The plain, steady voice returned, quieter now, but no less certain. "This is Reyes," she said. "Your fleet is broken, your escorts are gone, I have you and you know it." A pause. "I gave you one chance to leave at the start. You didn't take it. So here's the second one, and it's the last. Power down your weapons and turn your ship around, and I will let you go home. Keep fighting, and you don't go home at all. It was the same choice Doran had offered 1,000 enemies across 40 cycles of war. Surrender and live, or fight and die. He had never once expected to hear it spoken to him. The Vorath did not surrender. The word did not exist in their war training. It was the one thing 900 cycles of victory had never forced any of them to consider. He looked at his bridge, at his young officers, at the faces of the crew who had followed him into the dark, and were now waiting to see what their commander would choose. He looked at the display, where the lights of his fleet continued to die. And above him, dim now in the alarm light, the war record still glowed, its perfect number sitting there like a thing already broken, waiting only for someone to admit it. "Commander," his tactical officer whispered, "what do we do?" There is a kind of courage in winning, and a rarer kind in knowing when you have lost. The Vorath had spent 900 cycles learning the first kind. Doran was about to learn the second, alone, in front of every officer who had ever looked up to him. The flagship hung dead in the clearing of mist, its escorts gone, the human warship Resolute drifting close enough now that Doran could see the scars across its hull, the dark patches where its guns had burned out, the deep wound in its side from a fight that had happened days before any of this began. It was a ruin of a ship. It had walked into his fleet broken and bleeding, and it had taken his fleet apart anyway. He thought about the report his intelligence officer had read him. Humans fight to not lose. They have no breaking point. He understood it fully now, watching the wreck of the Resolute refuse to drift away even in victory. They would not have stopped. If he kept fighting, they would have torn his flagship apart and burned with it rather than let him go. The choice in front of him was not really a choice between victory and defeat. Victory was already gone. The only choice left was between a defeat he survived and a defeat he did not. His officers were watching him, young faces, sharp and proud, raised on the same war record he had served his whole life. They were waiting for him to do the Vorath thing, the proud thing, to fight to the end and die undefeated rather than live with a loss. Doran had spent 40 cycles believing that was courage. Standing on his dying ship, he finally saw it for what it was. It was easy to die for pride. Anyone could do it. The hard thing, the thing none of his species had ever been forced to do, was to live and carry the shame and learn from it. "Power down the weapons," he said. For a moment no one moved. The words did not seem real. "Commander," his tactical officer said. "You heard me. Power down, all of them. Open a channel to the human ship." His voice did not shake. "We are going home." His officers obeyed slowly, their hands moving as if through deep water. One by one the flagship's weapons went cold. The great guns powered down. The ship that had led 900 victories laid down its arms in the heart of a nebula, and the war record on the wall, dim in the alarm light, finally meant nothing at all. The channel opened. "This is Doran, fleet commander of the Vorath Dominion," he said. "We yield. Let my people leave, and we will go and not return." There was a pause on the other end. Then Ray's answered, and her voice had lost its hard edge. She sounded only tired now and something almost like respect. "Take your ships and go, Commander, all of them. We won't fire on a fleet that's leaving. A beat. That was always the deal. We just needed you to believe it." The human squadron pulled back. They opened the lanes they had blocked, drew their net loose, and let the broken Vorath fleet gather what was left of itself and limp out of the deep mist toward open space. The humans did not chase. They did not finish the wounded. They simply watched the Dominion go and let it go. It was a mercy the Vorath had never once shown an enemy in 900 cycles. Doran understood why the humans offered it. A dead enemy teaches nothing to those who come after. A living enemy carries the lesson home. The humans were not letting him escape. They were sending him back as a message, written in the wreck of an undefeated fleet, for every species in the galaxy to read. The journey home was long and silent. Doran sat with the count of his losses and the heavier weight of the thing he had broken. When at last the flagship reached Vorath's space, he sat down to write his report, and he found there were no words in his language for what had happened because his language had never needed them. He had to make new ones. He wrote them plainly. We met a species that does not break. We cornered them against every warning, and they did to us what we have done to others. The war record is ended. We are not invincible. We never were. We had simply never met the ones who would prove it. He sent the report to every commander in the Dominion. He did not soften it. He had spent a lifetime being proud, and he had nothing left to protect now but the truth and the lives it might still save. Far away, in the quiet of the nebula, the Resolute drifted in the colored mist while its crew worked to keep it alive long enough to reach home. Reyes sat in her chair, finally still, and opened her own log. She did not write the entry as a victory. She had seen too many of her own kind die over the cycles to ever call a battle a triumph. She wrote it as something else. Contact made with the Vorath Dominion, she wrote. They believed they could not lose. We showed them otherwise because they gave us no other choice. We did not want this war. We do not want the next one. The message we sent is simple, and I hope it is enough. Leave us alone and we will leave you in peace. Come for us and you will learn what they learned. She looked out at the slow turning of the stars beyond the mist, the same stars humans had looked up at from a brutal world for 100,000 years, learning the one lesson that had carried them all the way out here. Endure, whatever comes, endure. Then she closed the log and turned her wounded ship toward home.